pristine white of the bedroom walls seemed to close in on Gabrielle as she stood frozen, her trembling hand clutching her phone. The device, usually a lifeline to the outside world, now felt like a ticking bomb in her palm. The text message that illuminated the screen was short, but its impact was devastating. "I can't do this anymore. He needs to know. I'm telling him tonight." The sender, Gabrielle's younger sister, Naomi. The him in question, Xavier, Gabrielle's husband of 10 years. In that moment, on a crisp autumn evening in Chicago, Gabrielle's world imploded. The carefully constructed facade of her perfect life crumbled, revealing a decade of lies, betrayal, and unspoken resentment. As the gravity of the situation sank in, a cold, unfamiliar feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. It was a mixture of rage, heartbreak, and something darker, a thirst for vengeance that would set in motion a chain of events that would shock the entire city. Little did Gabrielle know that this moment would be the catalyst for a crime that would captivate Chicago, leaving detectives baffled, a community divided, and 3 lives irrevocably shattered. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal that led to murder, one must first understand the lives of those involved. Xavier and Gabrielle Washington were, by all accounts, Chicago's golden couple. Their love story was the stuff of modern fairy tales, a narrative of success and romance that seemed almost too perfect to be true. Xavier, with his towering frame and charismatic smile, had been a star basketball player at the University of Illinois. After a promising but short-lived professional career cut short by a knee injury, he seamlessly transitioned into sports management. By his early 30s, he was one of the most sought-after agents in the Midwest, representing some of Chicago's brightest athletic talents. Gabrielle, on the other hand, was a force of nature in her own right. Brilliant and ambitious, she had worked her way up from a modest background to become one of the youngest partners at a prestigious law firm in downtown Chicago. Her sharp mind and unwavering determination had earned her a reputation as a formidable presence in the courtroom. They met at a charity gala in 2013, their eyes locking across a crowded room in a moment that both would later describe as electric. Their whirlwind romance captured the imagination of Chicago's social circles. Within a year, they were engaged, and their wedding was the event of the season. The Washingtons settled into a stunning brownstone in the historic Bronzeville neighborhood. Their home, with its blend of modern luxury and classic architecture, became a symbol of their success, a testament to 2 people who had worked tirelessly to achieve their dreams. As the years passed, Xavier and Gabrielle seemed to only grow stronger as a couple. They were fixtures at Chicago's most exclusive events, always impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of success and contentment. They supported each other's careers, championed various charitable causes, and were seen as role models in their community. To the outside world, Xavier and Gabrielle Washington had it all. Their life seemed picture perfect, a modern-day success story that inspired admiration and perhaps a touch of envy. Friends often joked that they were too good to be true, a comment that would later take on a haunting significance. But beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic life, cracks were beginning to form. The pressure of maintaining their image, the long hours devoted to their demanding careers, and the unspoken expectations they placed on each other were slowly taking their toll. And then there was Naomi, Gabrielle's younger sister by 5 years. Where Gabrielle was all polish and poise, Naomi was free-spirited and artistic. She had moved to Chicago 3 years into Xavier and Gabrielle's marriage, ostensibly to be closer to her sister and to pursue her dreams of becoming a successful painter. Naomi's arrival in Chicago marked the beginning of a shift in the dynamics of the Washington household. At first, her presence seemed to bring a breath of fresh air into Xavier and Gabrielle's structured lives. She was a frequent visitor to their home, her laughter and carefree attitude a stark contrast to the sometimes tense atmosphere that had begun to develop between the couple. Xavier, in particular, seemed to enjoy Naomi's company. He would later claim that her presence reminded him of the early days of his relationship with Gabrielle, when life felt less complicated and more full of possibility. Gabrielle, consumed by her work and the pressures of maintaining their social status, was initially grateful for Naomi's presence in their lives. But as months turned into years, Subtle changes began to occur. Lingering glances between Xavier and Naomi at family gatherings, inside jokes that excluded Gabrielle, late-night conversations that would abruptly end when Gabrielle entered the room. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it's buried. And on that fateful autumn evening, as Gabrielle stood in her bedroom, staring at the text message that would change everything, she realized that the life she thought she knew had been built on a foundation of lies. The golden couple of Chicago was about to fall from grace, and the impact would be felt far beyond the walls of their Bronzeville brownstone. The revelation of Xavier and Naomi's affair sent shockwaves through Gabrielle's world. As she stood in her bedroom, the phone still clutched in her hand, memories of the past decade flashed through her mind. Every shared laugh, every tender moment, every promise of forever, all of it now tainted by the knowledge of this betrayal. Gabrielle's first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke, or a misunderstanding. But as she scrolled through the message history between Xavier and Naomi, the truth became undeniable. The affair had been going on for years, right under her nose. There were messages of stolen moments, clandestine meetings in out-of-the-way cafes, passionate encounters in hotel rooms, and whispered promises of a future together. The depth of their deception was staggering. How many times had Gabrielle sat across the dinner table from them, oblivious to the secret glances and hidden touches? As the initial shock wore off, a maelstrom of emotions swept over Gabrielle. Anger, hurt, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing sense of humiliation. She had been made a fool of, not just by her husband, but by her own sister. The two people she trusted most in the world had conspired to deceive her for years. Gabrielle's mind raced, piecing together all the little inconsistencies and odd behaviors that she had dismissed over the years. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the times when Xavier had been oddly defensive about his phone. It all made sense now. And Naomi, sweet, free-spirited Naomi, how could she have done this? Gabrielle remembered all the times she had confided in her sister about her marriage, sharing her hopes, fears, and insecurities. Had Naomi been laughing at her all along? As the full weight of the betrayal settled on her, Gabrielle felt something shift inside her. The hurt and shock began to crystallize into something harder, colder. A desire for retribution began to take root in her heart. She thought about confronting them immediately, imagining the satisfaction of seeing the shock and fear on their faces when they realized they had been caught. But a small, calculating voice in her head urged caution. If she wanted true revenge, she needed to be smart about this. Gabrielle took a deep breath, forcing herself to think like the lawyer she was. She needed evidence, irrefutable proof of their affair, and she needed a plan. Over the next few weeks, Gabrielle became a woman possessed. By day, she maintained her usual routine, going to work, attending social events, playing the role of the devoted wife. But in secret, she was gathering evidence. She hired a private investigator to follow Xavier and Naomi, documenting their clandestine meetings with photographs and video footage. She secretly installed tracking software on Xavier's phone, monitoring his messages and location. She even went through years of financial records, finding evidence of hotel stays and expensive gifts that Xavier had never mentioned. As the evidence mounted, so did Gabrielle's rage. Each new discovery was like a knife twisting in her heart. She learned that the affair had started just 2 years into her marriage, around the time when she and Xavier had been trying unsuccessfully to conceive a child. The thought that he had been sleeping with her sister while she was grappling with feelings of inadequacy and failure was almost too much to bear. But perhaps the most painful discovery came when Gabrielle found a series of emails between Xavier and Naomi discussing their plans for the future. They talked about running away together, starting a new life far from Chicago. Xavier spoke of his growing dissatisfaction with his life with Gabrielle, describing her as cold and career-obsessed. Naomi, in turn, wrote about how she had always been in love with Xavier, even before he and Gabrielle got married. Reading these intimate exchanges, Gabrielle felt as if she was looking at her life through a warped mirror. Everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her sister, and herself was called into question. Had she really been so blind, so unlovable that her husband had to turn to her own sister for affection? As weeks turned into months, Gabrielle's pain began to harden into something darker. The idea of simply confronting them and ending her marriage no longer seemed like enough. They had stolen years of her life, made a mockery of her trust and love. They deserved to suffer as she had suffered. It was during this time that Gabrielle began to formulate a plan that would not only expose their betrayal, but would ensure that they could never find happiness together. A plan that would make them pay for every lie, every stolen moment, every betrayal. Little did Xavier and Naomi know, as they continued their affair, believing they had successfully kept their secret, that Gabrielle was watching, waiting, and planning. The woman they had underestimated, the woman they thought they could deceive indefinitely, was about to show them just how dangerous she could be. As autumn gave way to winter in Chicago, a chill settled over the city. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the icy determination that had taken root in Gabrielle's heart. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the city and leave 3 lives forever altered. As Christmas approached, the tension in the Washington household was palpable. Gabrielle, armed with her devastating knowledge and a meticulously crafted plan, found it increasingly difficult to maintain her facade of normalcy. Every smile felt forced. Every touch from Xavier made her skin crawl, and every family gathering with Naomi present was an exercise in self-control. Xavier, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, continued his double life with practiced ease. He showered Gabrielle with affection, perhaps compensating for his guilt, while secretly planning a rendezvous with Naomi. His confidence in his ability to juggle both relationships had grown over the years, leading to a dangerous complacency. Naomi, on the other hand, was beginning to crack under the pressure. Her text to Gabrielle hadn't been an isolated moment of conscience, but rather the culmination of years of guilt and internal conflict. She found herself unable to look her sister in the eye. Her artwork, once vibrant and full of life, becoming dark and chaotic, reflecting her turbulent emotional state. The annual Washington Christmas party, a lavish affair that had become a highlight of Chicago's social calendar, was fast approaching. Gabrielle, in a move that surprised both Xavier and Naomi, threw herself into the preparations with unprecedented enthusiasm. Little did they know that she was setting the stage for a confrontation that would change their lives forever. On the night of the party, the Washington brownstone was transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling lights adorned every surface, the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses echoed through the rooms. Chicago's elite mingled, admiring the decor and praising the seemingly perfect hosts. Gabrielle moved through the crowd with grace, her crimson dress a stark contrast to the white and silver decor. She played the role of the perfect hostess flawlessly, her smile never wavering, even as her eyes constantly tracked Xavier and Naomi's movements through the party. As the night wore on, the tension began to build. Gabrielle noticed Xavier and Naomi exchanging meaningful glances and saw them disappear from the party at suspiciously similar times. Each observation was like fuel to the fire of her rage, stoking the flames of her carefully laid plans. Finally, as the party was winding down and the last of the guests were saying their goodbyes, Gabrielle made her move. She approached Xavier and Naomi, who were standing a little too close together near the Christmas tree, and suggested they all have a nightcap in Xavier's study to celebrate another successful event. The study, with its rich mahogany bookshelves and leather chairs, had always been Xavier's sanctuary. As they entered, Gabrielle locked the door behind them, the soft click of the lock sounding ominous in the sudden silence. "I think it's time we had a talk," Gabrielle said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "About truth, loyalty, and consequences." Xavier and Naomi exchanged confused glances, still unaware that their secret had been discovered. "What's this about, Gabby?" Xavier asked, a note of concern in his voice. Instead of answering, Gabrielle walked to Xavier's desk and opened her laptop. With a few clicks, she pulled up a slideshow and projected it onto the large screen mounted on the wall. The first image appeared. A photograph of Xavier and Naomi in an intimate embrace, clearly taken without their knowledge. The color drained from both their faces as they realized the implications of what they were seeing. 10 years, Gabrielle said, her voice barely above a whisper. 10 years of lies, betrayal, and deceit. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? What followed was a devastating presentation of evidence. Photographs, video clips, email exchanges, bank statements. Gabrielle had compiled a damning dossier of their affair. With each new piece of evidence, Xavier and Naomi seemed to shrink into themselves, the weight of their actions finally crashing down upon them. "Gabby, I can explain," Xavier started, but Gabrielle cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Explain? What could you possibly say to explain this?" She turned to Naomi, who was silently weeping. "And you, my own sister, how could you do this to me?" Naomi, through her tears, tried to speak. "I'm so sorry, Gabby. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened." "Just happened?" Gabrielle's voice was ice. "For 8 years? You've been lying to my face, sleeping with my husband for 8 years, and you say it just happened?" The confrontation continued, with Xavier and Naomi alternating between attempts at explanation and pleas for forgiveness. But Gabrielle was unmoved. She had spent months preparing for this moment, steeling herself against their excuses and apologies. As the night wore on, the true extent of Gabrielle's plan began to unfold. She revealed that she had already filed for divorce, citing infidelity and naming Naomi as the other woman. She had used her connections in the legal world to ensure that the proceedings would be swift and merciless, leaving Xavier with little more than the clothes on his back. But that was just the beginning. Gabrielle had also arranged for the evidence of their affair to be sent to key figures in Xavier's professional life: his clients, business partners, and the ethics board of the Sports Management Association. His career, built on a reputation of trustworthiness and integrity, would be in tatters by morning. As for Naomi, Gabrielle had made sure that her betrayal would be known to their entire family and social circle. The promising art career that Naomi had been nurturing would likely not survive the scandal. "You took everything from me," Gabrielle said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "My trust, my love, my future. Now I'm taking everything from you." The devastation on Xavier and Naomi's faces was complete. They had entered the study as secret lovers, confident in their ability to maintain their deception. They left as broken individuals, their lives irrevocably altered by the consequences of their actions. As they stumbled out of the study, leaving Gabrielle alone, the weight of what she had done began to settle on her. She had achieved her goal. Xavier and Naomi would suffer for their betrayal. But as she looked around the room, at the remnants of the life she had shared with Xavier, she realized that her victory felt hollow. The anger that had sustained her for months began to ebb, leaving behind a profound sense of loss and emptiness. She had lost her husband, her sister, and in many ways, herself. As dawn broke over Chicago, Gabrielle Washington sat alone in the study, surrounded by the evidence of her shattered life, wondering if revenge had been worth the cost. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. The events of that night would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to an even greater tragedy, one that would shock the city of Chicago to its core. The days following the Christmas party confrontation were a blur of activity and emotion for all involved. The carefully constructed lives of the Washingtons and Naomi began to unravel at an alarming rate, the ripple effects of their actions spreading far beyond their immediate circle. For Xavier, the consequences were swift and severe. As Gabrielle had promised, his professional life imploded almost overnight. Clients, unwilling to be associated with the scandal, began terminating their contracts en masse. The ethics board of the Sports Management Association launched an immediate investigation, citing concerns about his judgment and integrity. Within a week, Xavier Washington, once one of Chicago's most respected sports agents, found himself persona non grata in the industry he had dominated for years. The divorce proceedings, expedited by Gabrielle's connections and the overwhelming evidence of infidelity, moved at a breakneck pace. Xavier, still reeling from the public exposure of his affair and the loss of his career, was in no position to mount an effective defense. The courts, sympathetic to Gabrielle's plight, awarded her the majority of their assets, including the Bronzeville brownstone. Xavier was left with little more than his personal belongings and a fraction of their joint savings. Gabrielle found herself alone in the brownstone that had once been filled with love and laughter. The rooms, still bearing the remnants of her life with Xavier, felt cavernous and cold. She threw herself into her work, taking on more cases than ever before, but even her passion for the law seemed diminished. As winter settled over Chicago, blanketing the city in snow, Gabrielle's emotional state continued to deteriorate. The triumph of exposing Xavier and Naomi's betrayal was overshadowed by the realization of just how much she had lost. Not just her marriage and her relationship with her sister, but her faith in love, in family, in the very foundations of her life. She began to withdraw from her social circles, declining invitations and avoiding public events. The whispers and pitying glances of acquaintances became too much to bear. Even her colleagues at the law firm, while outwardly supportive, seemed to treat her differently, as if her personal tragedy had somehow diminished her professional capabilities. It was during this period of isolation that Gabrielle's thoughts began to take a darker turn. The pain of betrayal, which she had channeled into her meticulously planned revenge, began to morph into something more dangerous. She found herself obsessing over Xavier and Naomi, wondering if they had found a way to be together despite the wreckage of their lives. The idea that they might find happiness together after everything they had done was unbearable to Gabrielle. She began to feel that her revenge, as devastating as it had been, was somehow incomplete. The rational, composed lawyer that she had always prided herself on being was giving way to a woman consumed by pain and a growing desire for a more permanent form of retribution. Naomi, overwhelmed by guilt and the sudden loss of her support system, fled Chicago. She retreated to a small town in Wisconsin, where she took a job as a waitress, her dreams of artistic success seemingly shattered. The vibrant, carefree woman she had once been was replaced by a shell of her former self, haunted by the pain she had caused her sister and the life she had destroyed. As spring approached, bringing with it the promise of renewal, the lives of Gabrielle, Xavier, and Naomi remained mired in the aftermath of their choices. But fate, it seemed, was not done with them yet. A chance encounter would soon set in motion a chain of events that would lead to an even greater tragedy, one that would shock the city of Chicago and forever alter the lives of all involved. The stage was set for a final, devastating act in this drama of betrayal and revenge. And at the center of it all was Gabrielle, a woman pushed to the brink, teetering on the edge of a decision that would have irreversible consequences. As Chicago emerged from the grip of winter, the city seemed to come alive with renewed energy. The streets buzzed with activity, parks filled with people eager to soak in the warmth of the spring sun. But for Gabrielle Washington, the changing seasons brought no relief from the darkness that had settled over her life. In the months following the exposure of Xavier and Naomi's affair, Gabrielle had become a shadow of her former self. The confident, ambitious lawyer who had once commanded respect in courtrooms across the city was now a recluse, rarely venturing out of her Bronzeville home except for work. Her colleagues at the law firm had begun to whisper about her erratic behavior. Cases that she would have once handled with ease now seemed to overwhelm her. Her razor-sharp focus had given way to distraction and forgetfulness. More than once, she had been cautioned by senior partners about her performance. But what her colleagues couldn't see was the storm raging inside Gabrielle's mind. The pain of betrayal, which she had initially channeled into her calculated revenge, had mutated into something far more dangerous. Obsession had taken root, growing like a poisonous vine around her thoughts. It was on a rainy Tuesday in April that fate intervened, setting in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy. Gabrielle, leaving her office after another day of distracted work, quite literally ran into Xavier on the street. The encounter was brief and awkward. Xavier, looking haggard and unkempt, a far cry from the polished sports agent he had once been, mumbled an apology and tried to hurry past. But in that moment, Gabrielle saw something that stopped her cold, a flash of a familiar necklace around Xavier's neck. It was a simple silver chain with a small, abstract pendant, a piece she recognized instantly as one of Naomi's creations. The implications hit Gabrielle like a physical blow. Despite everything, despite the public humiliation and the destruction of their lives, Xavier and Naomi were still together. This realization shattered what little equilibrium Gabrielle had managed to maintain. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her pain came crashing down, releasing a flood of rage and despair. In the days that followed, Gabrielle's grip on reality began to slip. She stopped going to work, ignoring calls from concerned colleagues. Her days and nights blurred together as she pored over the evidence she had gathered of Xavier and Naomi's affair, reliving every moment of betrayal. It was during one of these sleepless nights that the idea first took shape in Gabrielle's mind. A way to end the pain, to silence the constant thoughts of Xavier and Naomi together. A final act of revenge that would ensure they could never find happiness. At first, Gabrielle recoiled from the darkness of her own thoughts. She was a lawyer, an officer of the court. The idea of taking a life was anathema to everything she had ever believed in. But as the days wore on and her mental state continued to deteriorate, the idea began to take on a twisted logic. She began to plan, applying the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her such a formidable lawyer. She researched methods, considered alibis, weighed the pros and cons of various scenarios. In her distorted state of mind, it all seemed perfectly rational. A problem to be solved, like any legal case. As May turned to June, Gabrielle's plan began to take its final shape. She had managed to track down Naomi's address in Wisconsin through a private investigator. She knew her sister's routines, the layout of the small town where she now lived. All that remained was to choose the moment to act. The opportunity presented itself on a warm evening in late June. Gabrielle, having taken a leave of absence from her law firm citing health reasons, drove to Wisconsin. She told herself she was just going to confront Naomi one last time, to find some closure. But the gun hidden in her glove compartment told a different story. As she pulled into the parking lot of the diner where Naomi worked, Gabrielle felt a strange sense of calm descend over her. The turmoil of the past months seemed to recede, replaced by a singular focus on what she was about to do. She waited until Naomi's shift ended, watching from her car as her sister emerged from the diner. Naomi looked different, her once vibrant appearance now subdued, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. For a moment, Gabrielle hesitated, a flicker of sisterly affection breaking through her resolve. But then she saw it. The same necklace she had spotted on Xavier, its twin now hanging around Naomi's neck. The sight reignited Gabrielle's rage, obliterating any last traces of doubt or familial love. As Naomi walked to her car, Gabrielle made her move. She stepped out of her vehicle, the gun now in her hand, hidden by the folds of her coat. "Naomi," she called out, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Naomi turned, her eyes widening in shock and fear as she recognized her sister. "Gabby? What are you doing here?" Gabrielle advanced slowly, her mind racing. This was the moment she had planned for, the culmination of months of pain and obsession. But now, faced with the reality of what she was about to do, she found herself hesitating. "You took everything from me," Gabrielle said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband, my trust, my life. Did you think I would just let you walk away? That I would let you be happy after what you did?" Naomi, realizing the danger she was in, began to back away. "Gabby, please. I know we hurt you. I'm so sorry. But this isn't the answer. Please, let's talk about this." For a moment, it seemed as if Naomi's words might break through. Gabrielle's hand, still hidden in her coat, began to tremble. But then her eyes fixed once again on the necklace, the symbol of Xavier and Naomi's enduring relationship despite everything. In that instant, something in Gabrielle snapped. With a cry of anguish that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, she pulled out the gun and fired. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the quiet parking lot, followed by a moment of eerie silence. Then, chaos erupted. Naomi collapsed to the ground, blood blossoming on her shirt. Screams erupted from bystanders who had witnessed the shooting. Gabrielle stood frozen, the gun still in her hand, as the full weight of what she had done crashed over her. She looked down at Naomi, her sister, bleeding on the asphalt, and felt the last vestiges of her sanity slip away. As sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of police, Gabrielle made no move to flee. She simply sank to her knees beside Naomi's body, the gun clattering to the ground beside her. In that moment, she realized that her quest for revenge had cost her not just her marriage and her sister, but her very self. Gabrielle Washington, who had once been a respected lawyer, a loving wife and sister, ceased to exist in that parking lot. In her place was a broken woman, consumed by pain and regret, waiting numbly for the consequences of her actions to claim her. As the police cars screeched into the parking lot and officers approached with weapons drawn, Gabrielle offered no resistance. She allowed herself to be handcuffed and led away, leaving behind a scene of tragedy that would soon shock the entire city of Chicago. The story of the Washington family's downfall, which had begun with a secret affair and a betrayal, had reached its devastating conclusion. But the ripple effects of that fateful night in Wisconsin would continue to be felt for years to come, forever altering the lives of all who had been touched by this tale of love, betrayal, and revenge. The news of the shooting spread through Chicago like wildfire. The story of Gabrielle Washington, once a respected lawyer, gunning down her own sister in a small Wisconsin town, captivated the city. It was a tale of betrayal, revenge, and tragedy that seemed almost too sensational to be true. In the days following the shooting, more details emerged, painting a picture of a woman driven to the brink by betrayal and obsession. The media dug into the background of the case, unearthing the sordid details of Xavier and Naomi's affair, Gabrielle's calculated revenge, and the downward spiral that had led to this tragic outcome. For the people of Chicago, particularly those in the legal and sports management communities, the story was a shocking fall from grace. Gabrielle and Xavier Washington had once been held up as examples of success and integrity. Now their names were synonymous with scandal and tragedy. As Gabrielle awaited trial in a Wisconsin jail, the full impact of her actions began to ripple through the lives of all involved. Xavier, upon hearing the news of the shooting, was devastated. Despite everything that had happened, Naomi was the woman he loved, and Gabrielle was still his wife. The guilt of his actions, which had set this tragic chain of events in motion, weighed heavily upon him. In the wake of the shooting, Xavier finally hit rock bottom. The last vestiges of his once successful career crumbled away as the renewed scandal made him completely unemployable in the sports world. Unable to cope with the guilt and public scrutiny, he checked himself into a rehabilitation facility, seeking help for the depression and substance abuse issues that had plagued him since the exposure of his affair. Naomi miraculously survived the shooting, though her recovery would be long and difficult. The bullet had missed her vital organs, but caused significant damage. As she lay in a hospital bed under police guard, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions in a way she never had before. The betrayal of her sister, the affair with Xavier, the pain they had caused, it all came crashing down on Naomi as she fought for her life. The carefree artist she had once been was gone, replaced by a woman burdened with guilt and regret. Even as she recovered physically, the emotional scars of what had transpired would remain with her forever. Meanwhile, the legal community in Chicago watched in stunned disbelief as one of their own was charged with attempted murder. Gabrielle's former colleagues at the law firm struggled to reconcile the brilliant, composed lawyer they had known with the broken woman they saw in news reports and courtroom sketches. The trial, when it finally came, was a media sensation. Reporters from across the country descended on the small Wisconsin courthouse, eager to chronicle every detail of this tragic tale. Gabrielle, once an imposing presence in any courtroom, now sat silently at the defense table, a shell of her former self. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman consumed by revenge, meticulously planning the murder of her own sister. They presented evidence of Gabrielle's obsession, the months of surveillance, the elaborate revenge plot that had destroyed Xavier and Naomi's lives, and finally, the calculated decision to end Naomi's life. Gabrielle's defense team, on the other hand, argued that she had been pushed to the brink by the betrayal she had suffered. They presented evidence of her deteriorating mental state in the months leading up to the shooting, arguing that she had been in a state of temporary insanity when she pulled the trigger. The trial lasted for weeks, each day bringing new revelations and emotional testimony. Xavier took the stand, visibly shaken and remorseful, to recount the affair and its aftermath. His testimony painted a picture of a man who had made a terrible mistake and was now paying the price for his actions. Naomi, still recovering from her injuries, also testified. Her appearance in the courtroom caused a stir. The physical evidence of Gabrielle's actions clear in her halting gait and the scar visible at the neckline of her blouse. Her testimony was emotional and raw, a mix of apology for her role in the affair and fear of the sister who had nearly taken her life. Perhaps the most poignant moment of the trial came when Gabrielle herself took the stand. Gone was the polished, articulate lawyer who had once commanded courtrooms. In her place was a woman broken by grief, betrayal, and the weight of her own actions. Gabrielle spoke haltingly of the pain of discovering the affair, the months of anger and obsession that followed, and the moment when she decided to end it all. As she recounted the events in the parking lot, the courtroom was silent, the air heavy with the tragedy of lives destroyed by secrets and lies. In the end, the jury found Gabrielle guilty of attempted murder, but with a recommendation for leniency due to extreme emotional distress. The judge, taking into account Gabrielle's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As Gabrielle was led away from the courtroom, the once powerful lawyer now in shackles, the full weight of the tragedy settled over all involved. 3 lives, once so full of promise, had been irrevocably altered by a web of deceit and a moment of violent retribution. In the years that followed the trial, the ripple effects of the Washington family tragedy continued to be felt throughout Chicago and beyond. Gabrielle, once a rising star in the legal world, found herself navigating a very different kind of system as an inmate in the Wisconsin correctional system. The transition was difficult, to say the least. A woman who had once argued cases before the state Supreme Court now spent her days in group therapy sessions and working in the prison library. Yet, as the years passed, Gabrielle began to find a kind of peace. The anger and obsession that had consumed her for so long gradually gave way to reflection and, eventually, remorse. She threw herself into prison education programs, using her legal knowledge to help fellow inmates with their cases. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself, but it was a life with purpose. Xavier, meanwhile, emerged from rehab a changed man. The cocky sports agent was gone, replaced by a humbled individual struggling to rebuild his life from the ground up. Unable to return to his former career, Xavier found work as a youth sports coach in a low-income neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. It was a far cry from the glitz and glamour of professional sports, but Xavier found a sense of fulfillment in mentoring young athletes that he had never experienced in his previous life. Naomi's recovery was a long and difficult journey, both physically and emotionally. The shooting left her with chronic pain and limited mobility in her left arm, effectively ending her career as a painter. But Naomi, always the most resilient of the 3, refused to let this setback define her. She channeled her creativity into writing, penning a memoir that became a bestseller and sparked important conversations about infidelity, family dynamics, and the far-reaching consequences of our actions. The story of the Washington family became a cautionary tale in Chicago, a reminder of how quickly lives can unravel when built on a foundation of lies. It sparked discussions about the pressures of maintaining a perfect image, the devastating impact of infidelity, and the fine line between justice and revenge. In legal circles, the case became a topic of intense study and debate. Ethics classes in law schools across the country used it as a case study, examining the moral and professional obligations of lawyers and the potential consequences when those lines are crossed. 10 years after the shooting, as Gabrielle became eligible for parole, Chicago once again turned its attention to the Washington family saga. The parole hearing was a media event, with reporters and curious onlookers packing the small room to catch a glimpse of the woman at the center of one of the city's most shocking crimes. Gabrielle, her hair now streaked with gray, spoke eloquently of her remorse and her journey towards redemption. She expressed deep regret for her actions and the pain she had caused, not just to Naomi and Xavier, but to their entire family and community. In a surprising turn of events, both Naomi and Xavier submitted statements in support of Gabrielle's parole. Naomi, in particular, spoke of forgiveness and the desire to move forward, stating that she believed her sister had paid for her crime and deserved a second chance. The parole board, after careful consideration, granted Gabrielle's release. As she stepped out of prison and into the bright Chicago sunshine, Gabrielle faced an uncertain future. Her law license had been revoked, her reputation was in tatters, and she would forever be known as the woman who shot her sister in a jealous rage. Yet as she took her first breaths of freedom, Gabrielle felt a sense of hope that had been absent for over a decade. She had lost everything, her career, her family, her freedom, but in that loss she had found a kind of clarity. The anger and bitterness that had consumed her for so long were gone, replaced by a desire to make amends and to use her experiences to help others avoid the same pitfalls. Xavier, Naomi, and Gabrielle, once the golden couple and the artistic free spirit of Chicago's elite circles, were now three individuals forever bound by their shared history, each on their own path of redemption and self-discovery. Their story, which had captivated and shocked the city for over a decade, served as a powerful reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As Gabrielle took her first tentative steps back into Chicago society, the city watched with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. The final chapter of the Washington family saga was yet to be written, but one thing was certain: their story would continue to resonate, a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and the long road to redemption in the heart of the Windy City.